I spent years wanting Jake to change before I realized something that was very hard for me to admit. I was part of the problem too. For a long time, I thought if certain things about Jake would just change, our marriage would be better. If he would communicate differently, if he would understand things the way I understood them, if he would do certain things the way I thought they should be done, then surely we would have less tension. But after 34 years of marriage, I can tell you now, sometimes the person you are waiting to change isn't the only person who needs to change. Sometimes you have to look at yourself too. And that was one of the hardest lessons marriage ever taught me. When Jake and I got married, we were bringing two completely different lives into one house. Jake had already been married before. He had been married for 12 years. He was a widower. He already knew what it was like to live with a wife. He already had habits. He already had routines. He already had ideas about how a household worked. And then there was me. I had never been married. I was a single mother raising two teenage boys. I had spent years making decisions for myself and my children. I knew how I liked things done. I knew what worked for me. And if I'm telling the truth, I was used to being in charge of my own life. So here we were, two grown people, two different histories, two different ways of doing things, two different expectations. And somehow, I thought marriage meant Jake was supposed to adjust to mine. I didn't think of it that way at the time. I would have told you I was simply trying to help us. I thought I was showing him a better way. I thought I was explaining what made sense. But looking back, sometimes I wasn't trying to build a marriage. I was trying to raise a grown man who had already been raised. And there is a big difference. That realization didn't come easily, because when you are convinced that your way is the sensible way, it can be very difficult to understand why your spouse doesn't simply do things your way. And that's where a lot of unnecessary conflict can begin. Not because somebody is necessarily wrong, but because both people are different. One of the biggest mistakes I made early in our marriage was confusing different with wrong. If Jake handled something differently than I would, I thought his way was wrong. If he responded differently than I would, I thought he wasn't understanding me. If something mattered deeply to me and didn't seem to matter nearly as much to him, I sometimes took that personally. But marriage eventually taught me different does not automatically mean wrong. Sometimes it just means different. And two people cannot spend 34 years together peacefully if one of them has to become a copy of the other. I had to learn that Jake wasn't marrying me so I could turn him into Donna. And I didn't marry Jake so I could disappear and become him. Marriage required both of us to make room. Room for his personality, room for mine, room for his preferences, and room for mine, room for his strengths, and room for mine. And yes, room for both of our weaknesses too. Because that's another thing nobody tells you enough before marriage. You are not just marrying somebody's strengths. You are marrying a whole human being, and they are marrying one too. I can remember seasons when I would get so frustrated because Jake didn't respond the way I thought a husband should respond. Maybe I wanted more conversation. Maybe I wanted a certain reaction. Maybe I wanted him to see something immediately that seemed completely obvious to me. And when he didn't, I would think, why can't he just understand? But I wasn't always stopping to ask, why can't I understand him? That question changed a lot for me because marriage cannot survive very well when one person is always the student and the other person is always the teacher. Sometimes I needed to stop teaching Jake and start learning Jake, learning how he thought, learning what mattered to him, learning how he communicated, learning what made him shut down, learning what helped him open up, learning what made him feel respected. And at the same time, Jake had to learn me. That's marriage. Not two people demanding to be understood, but two people learning how to understand one another. There was another piece of this I had to face. I had been independent for a long time before I became a wife. I had raised children. I had handled responsibilities. I knew how to survive. And some of the very qualities that helped me survive as a single mother could become a problem if I carried them into marriage without adjusting them. Being decisive was useful, but if I always had to make every decision, that created tension. Being strong was useful, but if strength meant I never listened, that created tension. Knowing what I wanted was useful, but if I believed what I wanted was always what our marriage needed, that created tension too. Sometimes the quality itself wasn't the problem. It was how I used it. And that is why I say today, I had to stop looking at marriage as, what does Jake need to change? And start asking, what do I need to learn? That doesn't mean Jake never needed to change. Of course he did. He had things to work on too. I'm not taking responsibility for everything that ever went wrong in our marriage. Marriage is two people. But I finally realized I couldn't spend all my energy examining Jake while giving myself a pass. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't helping us. There is something humbling about realizing that some of the things bothering you in your marriage are being made worse by how you are responding to them. I had moments where my concern was legitimate, but my delivery made things worse. I had moments when I wanted closeness, but the way I approached Jake pushed him farther away. I had moments when I wanted communication, but I made the conversation feel so tense that neither one of us wanted to talk. That was hard for me to see because my intention was good, but good intentions don't always create good results. Sometimes you have to stop asking, "What did I mean?" and ask, "How did this feel to the person receiving it?" That question will humble you. One of the greatest changes in our marriage came when I stopped trying to win every point. I started asking myself, do I want to be right, or do I want us to understand each other? Those are not always the same thing. And there were times I was technically right about something, but the way I pushed it damaged the conversation. Marriage taught me that sometimes wisdom means knowing when something needs to be addressed and when something simply needs to be released. Everything does not need a meeting. Everything does not need a correction. Everything does not need a 10-minute explanation. Some things are preferences. Some things are personality. Some things are habits. And some things really do need a conversation. Learning the difference brought a lot more peace into our home. I also began to understand something about expectations. A lot of our frustration in marriage can come from expectations we never actually discussed. We create a picture in our mind of what a husband should do, what a wife should do, how affection should look, how communication should sound, how the house should run. And then we become disappointed when our spouse doesn't follow a script they never read. I did that. I had expectations Jake didn't even know existed. And then I would feel disappointed when he didn't meet them. Over time, I learned if something is truly important to me, I need to communicate it. Not test him, not hint, not hope he magically knows. Communicate it. And then listen to what matters to him too. That was another major shift. I learned marriage wasn't just about getting Jake to understand Donna. It was also about Donna understanding Jake. And when I began doing that, I became less frustrated. Not because Jake suddenly became perfect, but because I stopped interpreting every difference as a problem. Some things about him that once irritated me became things I simply understood. That's Jake. And I'm sure he reached the same place with me. That's Donna. After 34 years, there are things about each other we probably could have written a manual on. But that familiarity can become beautiful when you stop using it against each other. You stop being shocked that your spouse is your spouse. You learn them. You make room. You give grace. And you grow. There is something else I want to say because I never want these conversations to sound like I'm telling wives to take responsibility for everything. That is not what I am saying. If your husband is mistreating you, if there is abuse, if there is betrayal, if there is addiction, if you are unsafe, that is not the kind of situation I'm talking about. Those things need to be taken seriously. I'm talking about the ordinary marriage where two imperfect people love one another, but keep bumping into each other because they think differently, communicate differently, and were raised differently. Sometimes that marriage does not need a villain. Sometimes it needs understanding. And I think that's what I finally learned. Jake wasn't the enemy. I wasn't the enemy. We were two people trying to build one life while carrying two completely different histories. Once I understood that, I stopped feeling like every disagreement meant something was wrong with our marriage. Sometimes it simply meant we see this differently, and we learn how to work through it. I also learned something else that I wish someone had told me before I got married. Your spouse can influence you, but they cannot be responsible for all of your happiness. That was another area where I had to grow. I had to maintain my relationship with God, my own identity, my own emotional health, my own sense of purpose. Because when you expect another human being to fulfill every emotional need, you place a weight on that marriage that no person can carry. Jake is my husband. I love him deeply, but he is not my God. He cannot complete every part of me, and I cannot complete every part of him. There are spaces in us that belong to God. Understanding that took pressure off both of us. So if you are in a season right now where you keep thinking, if only my husband would change, I want you to ask yourself something. Not in a way that blames you, not in a way that excuses anything harmful. Just honestly ask, is there anything in me that needs to grow too? Maybe it is how you communicate. Maybe it is your expectations. Maybe you need to listen differently. Maybe you need stronger boundaries. Maybe you need to stop trying to control something that simply isn't yours to control. Maybe you need to speak up about something you've been holding inside. Growth looks different for every marriage. But one thing I know is this. The moment I stopped making Jake the only person who needed to change, I finally had some power over what happened next. Because I could not control Jake, but I could work on Donna, and that changed everything. I began asking different questions. Instead of, why is he like this? I began asking, what is happening between us? Instead of, how do I get him to change? I began asking, how can we understand each other better? Instead of, why doesn't he see things my way? I began asking, what am I missing about his point of view? Those questions didn't make every problem disappear, but they changed the atmosphere of the conversation. And eventually, they changed me. 34 years later, I'm grateful Jake didn't become exactly who I thought he should be, because I would have missed the man he actually is. And I'm grateful he gave me room to grow too. We have both changed over the years. Life changed us. Marriage changed us. Parenthood changed us. Cancer changed us. Caregiving changed us. Age changed us. God changed us. And we are still learning. That's what a long marriage really is. Not reaching someplace where you finally know everything about each other. It is continuing to learn the person beside you, even as both of you continue changing. So no, I don't spend my days trying to raise Jake anymore. He was already raised. And I don't need him trying to raise me either. We are two grown people learning how to love one another well. And sometimes love means speaking. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means changing. Sometimes it means accepting. Sometimes it means apologizing. And sometimes it simply means recognizing my way isn't the only way. That one lesson brought more peace into my marriage than I can tell you. If you have been waiting for your husband to change before you believe your marriage can get better, don't forget to look at the one person you actually have the power to work on, yourself. Not because everything is your fault, but because growth on either side of a marriage can change what happens between two people. And if you've ever found yourself noticing everything your husband does wrong, watch The Day I Put the Magnifying Glass Away. Our Marriage Changed next. That lesson changed the way I saw Jake, and it changed our marriage. I'm Donna, and this is Still Standing with Donna. After 34 years of marriage and 40 years with the same man, I'm still learning, and so is he. And remember, this is a season, not a sentence. And if you've ever found yourself noticing everything your husband does wrong, watch The Day I Put the Magnifying Glass Away. Our Marriage Changed next. That lesson changed the way I saw Jake, and it changed our marriage.